Hello, everyone. Mr. Lipchick here. Today, our topic of discussion is the rise of the European nation state. In the Middle Ages, as kings consolidated their power, they did so through the formation of the nation state. Definition of the nation state is an independent country united under one government and linked by a common culture and language. The citizens of a state or a political body are not necessarily united by common culture and language. However, members of a nation are. So the nation state combines these connections and loyalties and creates a common system of government. Four large nation states began in the late Middle Ages to include England, France, Spain, and Russia. With the decline of Rome and the withdrawal of the legions from Britain, the British Isles were dominated by two Germanic tribes, the Angles and the Saxons. The Angles were primarily in northern, central, and eastern England, and the Saxons were located in the south. These groups adopted Christianity and formed the Anglo-Saxon culture and the English language. For about a century, the Anglo-Saxons were attacked by Norsemen in the Anglo-Scandinavian Wars. The Norsemen were the ancestors of the modern-day Danes. King Alfred of the Anglo-Saxons succeeded in defeating them and established the Kingdom of England, derived from the word Angleland, in 866. And in 1066, the Normans, descendants of the Vikings and other tribes, invaded England. Their king, William of Normandy, later known as William the Conqueror, defeated the English and killed their king, Harold, at the Battle of Hastings in 1066, a very critical date in British history. William became the King of England, and the Anglo-Saxon nobility was replaced by the Norman nobility. The Norman language eventually combined with that of the Anglo-Saxons to produce the modern English language. And over time, the social and cultural differences between Normans and Saxons diminished. William, the Conqueror, was a strong ruler and strengthened the administration of Britain. His grandson, Henry II, established a system of common law with judges and juries to enforce it. This is very important. Common law is the belief that there are certain universal principles upon which laws should be based, basic understanding of fairness and right and wrong. And it turned into a single legal code, which all would have to obey, all classes, all parts of the country. These universal concepts of right and wrong were very important because they would then allow people to examine traditional laws and determine whether or not they were obsolete or needed to be modified. Upon the death of Henry II, his son, Richard I, known as Richard the Lionheart, ascended the throne. Upon Richard's death, his brother John became king. John was a poor leader and began arbitrarily seizing the property of nobles. The nobles responded by forcing him to sign the Magna Carta, which is Latin for the Great Charter, in 1215. A very critical document in the legal history of the West. The Magna Carta forced King John to acknowledge the rights of the nobility. The king could not collect taxes without approval from a court of nobles. And the document held that there are laws that are applicable to everyone, and even the king had to obey them. And people would be entitled to a jury of their peers. it is significant in that it is one of the earliest documents limiting the power of the state against the individual and guaranteeing due process. Due process meaning the rule of law, people being allowed to enforce their rights if they are accused of something or being forced to do something. While most of the Magna Carta applied to the nobility, it would later inspire other classes and nations to strive for their own rights. It would inspire the English Bill of Rights in 1689, and later the Bill of Rights contained in the U.S. Constitution. The western territory of the Carolingian Empire was roughly equivalent to the lands of modern France. The Carolingian Empire and the Frankish kingdoms would eventually lay the foundation for the modern nation-state of France. The French are the descendants of the Franks, Celts, and Gauls. Their culture and language was heavily influenced by Rome. The French language is descended from a form of Latin spoken by the Romans. In 987, after the collapse of the Carolingian Empire, Hugh Capet was elected by the French nobility to become the King of France. This was the beginning of the French Capetian dynasty, the first recognized dynasty of French kings. The Capetians would eventually expand their control over the territories of France. And in 1180, Philip II would double the size of France's territory. Early on, like most European kingdoms, France was kind of a loosely governed territory in which the nobility had a great deal of power, but it too would evolve into a modern nation-state. In the 13th century, the Capetian king Louis IX organized and improved government administration and consolidated royal control over French territories. The last Capetian king, Charles IV, died in 1328. The Capetians would be followed by the Valois line of kings. And France would enter the 100 Years' War in 1337, further unifying it. The 100 Years' War would really help the English solidify their identity as a nation-state, and it would do the same for France through this struggle they had with one another. Spain, in the 700s, the Muslim Umayyad dynasty invaded Spain, taking control of most of the Iberian Peninsula, the Iberian Peninsula being synonymous with modern-day Spain and Portugal. Christians were left controlling only a small pocket of land in the north. The Muslims, however, tolerated Judaism and Christianity, and they brought with them the ancient Greek and Roman texts, which they had translated into Arabic. This was very significant in that they saw to it that many of these writings survived during the period of disorder that was the Middle Ages. They also brought with them new discoveries in math, science, medicine, and other fields. For instance, algebra is derived from al-Jabr, which was an Arabic innovation in mathematics. And the city of Cordoba became an international city of learning and culture for serious scholars in Europe. An effort by Christian forces to drive out the Muslims began in the 8th century and did not end until 1492. This time is known as the Reconquista, or reconquering, of the Iberian Peninsula. And by the 1200s, most of the Muslim forces were driven out of the Iberian Peninsula. the process of reconquering territory kingdoms uh, on the peninsula fought each other and expanded their territory. And eventually, the only two remaining kingdoms were those of Castile and Aragon. In 1469, Queen Isabella I of Castile and King Ferdinand II of Aragon were married, joining their kingdoms in a personal union. And what really would bring unity to the Spanish kingdom, which was very diverse, would be their strong Catholic beliefs. So the unification marked the beginning of the Kingdom of Spain. So while ethnically and linguistically diverse, Spain would be united in its Catholicism. You have many different languages and ethnic groups even today. You have the Catalans, you have the Basques, and so forth. Many of whom are still not terribly fond of one another. Okay. And in 1492, it continued the Reconquista by driving the last Muslim forces from the southern territory of Granada. The Inquisition, an effort to stamp out the heresy within the church, began in France in the 12th century. Other countries, such as Germany, the German states, and Italian states, had their own inquisitions. But it was most severe in Spain, where those who did not recant their heresy or disagreement with official church teaching were burned at the stake. The Grand Inquisitor of Spain, a monk named Tomás de Torquemada, was feared throughout the kingdom. The Inquisition expelled Muslims and Jews who would not convert to Catholicism. And this would have very negative economic consequences for Spain, as these groups were very creative and productive segments of society. Russia. In its early history, Russia consisted of disunited principalities or kingdoms that practiced Christianity. In the 10th century, the Principality of Kiev, which is the capital city of modern-day Ukraine, emerged as the most powerful, but eventually declined due to the Civil War. In the 13th century, there was even more disunity in Russia as Mongol invaders conquered it and threatened Western Europe. The Mongols were very fierce warriors who were excellent horsemen and were a force to be feared in Europe. They were skilled horsemen and fighters. Their army, known as the Golden Horde, was led by Genghis Khan. And the Mongols governed Russia for about 200 years, but did not interfere with daily affairs, provided that the princes paid taxes and pledged allegiance to them. They set things straight with the princes when they first entered Russia. They invited all the princes to a dance. And when they arrived, they built a dance floor on top of them, and the Mongols danced on top of it until they were crushed to death. So the Mongols meant business, and they understood it. In 1317, Prince Yuri of Moscow married Konchaka, the sister of the Mongol Khan. And this alliance allowed him to collect taxes and expand his territory. He expanded his armies and eventually engaged the Mongols in a series of battles. The Mongols eventually withdrew from Russia, and Moscow emerged as the center of Russian power. In 1547, the Grand Prince of Moscow, Ivan IV, became the first ruler of Russia, became the first Tsar. To prevent rebellion, he arrested and killed thousands of nobles, earning him the nickname Ivan the Terrible. And Russia emerged as a nation-state based upon the autocratic authority of the Tsar and the Russian language and the Russian Orthodox Church. So, in summary, these new nation states that emerged would each become a major force in world history. They would continue on into the modern era. Other states, such as Germany and Italy, would eventually form in Europe for different historical reasons. But, once again, a similar language and culture trying to unite. And these new states would fundamentally transform international politics, often becoming economic and political rivals. And their modern, efficient methods of administration would permit them to dominate other societies throughout the world. That concludes our discussion. Thank you very much. Hope to talk to you soon. Please have a nice day. Bye bye.